He told me that she wouldn't see her 20th birthday.
And I said, what can we do? And he said, nothing.
I was so scared that they weren't going to find out what it was, and that when they did find out, it was going to be too late.
He had no control over his body anymore. He couldn't close his eyes at all.
From that point on, I don't remember anything.
Next, two medical mysteries that defied the experts. Since she was a toddler, Tiffany House has been slowly losing the ability to move. And when a terrifying incident nearly cost the 7-year-old her life, Tiffany's parents find themselves facing their worst nightmare.
It was frightening. I was afraid that something was crippling my daughter.
Then, when a seemingly simple case of the flu hits Kevin Hughes, he doesn't think much of it. Little does Kevin know, he's about to begin a desperate fight for his life.
I was scared out of my mind. I just kept thinking, what could be going on in his body that's doing this to him? What else could possibly happen to him next?
When I strike, we look at the doctors for what they can't. If diagnosis is a mystery.
When San Antonio high school sweethearts Randall and Marilyn House married in the summer of 1970, they wasted no time preparing for their new lives together.
We bought our first home, and at that time we started thinking about a family.
But that simple dream would soon turn into an unexpected struggle for the young couple.
We tried for 3 or 4 or 5 years and never was successful at giving birth to a child.
We decided we were going to adopt.
Unfortunately, the road to adoption is not an easy one, and the process takes an enormous toll on both Randall and Marilyn.
You go through an approval process. They come and visit you and decide if they think you're acceptable to raise a child. So it's kind of difficult. It's having somebody come in and look at you.
But then one day in January of 1983, they receive a phone call that changes their lives forever.
They had a young girl. She was the most beautiful thing that we ever saw. But we were elated.
We picked her up and took her home, and she was just a precious little baby.
The new parents name their daughter Tiffany and quickly adjust to life as a family of 3.
She was very healthy, very, very beautiful, and it changed our lives almost completely, almost overnight.
Over the next 2 years, Randall and Marilyn add to their family. First, a younger sister for Tiffany, then a brother.
Well, it was wonderful. We had 3 children running around the house, and we had a lot of bonding with our children.
But shortly after Tiffany turns 3, the first sign of trouble appears when, out of the blue, she comes down with an alarming illness.
She seemed to have a little difficulty breathing. She was terribly congested. It often sounded like there was fluid in her throat or in her chest cavities.
We couldn't kick it. We couldn't get over it. So I took her to the doctor. The doctor says, well, she has a cold, and back then they would give you amoxicillin. We took tons of that stuff.
But as the weeks roll by, Tiffany can't seem to shake the persistent colds.
I remember, having a sore throat, runny nose, and then I'd get congested in my chest. Sometimes it'd get really bad.
It seemed to me there must be something maybe going on that we weren't aware of.
But each time Marilyn takes Tiffany in to see the pediatrician, he repeatedly assures her that the little girl just has a weaker than normal immune system.
When you hear there's nothing wrong, you go a big sigh of relief. Okay, well, there's nothing wrong here then.
Despite Tiffany's recurrent colds, she develops like a seemingly normal toddler. But a few weeks after her 4th birthday, Randall and Marilyn notice an unnerving new development.
She always ran different than other children. She kind of waddled like a duck.
I remember putting her in the yard and trying to teach her to run. I'd say, Tiffany, you have to move fast and let's move our arms. And she couldn't run. And we thought that was a little strange.
Concerned, Marilyn schedules an appointment with a pediatrician who gives the little girl a thorough head-to-toe exam.
And he would say, well, she's normal, that, she's just developing her motor skills. And I would leave and sigh and think, okay, she's okay.
Still, the Houses are eager to do whatever they can to help Tiffany along. And a few weeks later, her mother settles on a new approach.
We had a little ballet school in the center near our home, and it's kind of a little girl thing to do, so I took her there for lessons.
Marilyn can't wait to see her little ballerina in action. But her enthusiasm is short-lived when she realizes how much of a struggle it is for Tiffany to keep up.
She would fall on the stage. She couldn't bend as easily as the other children. She had difficulty getting up. In a group of 5 or 6, Tiffany would always be the one to trip up.
And the teacher told me that Tiffany seemed to have weak abdominal muscles, that she couldn't do some of the things that the other children did. And that was the first time I'd ever heard anybody say anything like that about her. I was really afraid. We were worried about her, didn't know what to do with her or what was going on.
Growing up in Cape May, New Jersey, Kevin Hughes was the star athlete who every girl wanted to date. But he only had eyes for Tina Tamburo.
We're set up through mutual friends, and things started there.
I like that he plays sports. He was outgoing. He's very loving, very caring. He's just an all-around good guy.
We spent our time together and then eventually got married in our early 20s and been together ever since.
While Tina served as a payroll supervisor, Kevin stayed busy working construction jobs. And after a hard day, he often enjoyed playing with his dogs and cycling.
I probably average around 30-mile rides, and in the summertime, I average about 120 to 150 miles a week.
He was always energetic, always just really into, staying fit and healthy.
In October 2008, the couple throws a barbecue to celebrate Kevin's best finish in a cycling race.
We invited a bunch of friends over. We had some hamburgers, hot dogs, and chicken.
I had, I believe, 1 hot dog and 1 cheeseburger. All the food was gone. Everyone had a good time.
But shortly after dinner, Kevin begins to feel very queasy.
I just felt like something wasn't settling too well in my stomach, and just needed to maybe rest it off. I was pretty tired, so I pretty much fell asleep right away, and within a couple hours, I woke up with a pretty bad cramp-like feeling in my stomach, and I had to go to the bathroom, and it was pretty bad diarrhea.
She said, I'm not feeling too good. I don't know what's wrong with me. Maybe it's something that I'd eaten. Do you feel okay? And I said, yeah, I feel fine. We just assumed maybe he's just having kind of some stomach bug or something.
I just took some medication to try and stop the diarrhea, and just went to work. And then as, I guess, once or twice before lunch, I had to go to the bathroom, and then it was easily 2 or 3 times after lunch I had to go to the bathroom again.
I didn't think it was anything horrible, something that would just, pass on through.
But over the next few days, the cramps and diarrhea intensify. And on Sunday, Kevin's condition takes a turn for the worse.
That morning we had woken up around 7 a.m. and by the end of the night, around 5 o'clock, he had gone to the bathroom 19 times. I decided that it was, too far along, that we had to take him to the emergency room.
And her instructor believes she may be suffering from something far more serious. Troubled by this latest development, her mother, Marilyn, makes an appointment with a local neurologist.
We thought that would be a good idea, that maybe we could just, just run her through a general checkup to see if she was okay.
This one doctor I saw was a neurologist, the typical neurology test that they do. Touch your finger to your nose, bend down, walk down the hall.
But nothing could have prepared Marilyn and Randall for what the doctor has to say.
He determined that, well, she's just weak. she's just weak. There's really nothing wrong that he could find.
I told him, I had concerns that she would fall, that she didn't seem to keep up with other children athletically, and he said that she seemed to him to be normal, within the normal range.
Distraught, the family heads home, unsure about what to do next.
I just wasn't convinced that she would be okay.
It was scary, yeah, especially for my wife, because she was always with Tiffany, and she was very, very concerned about her physical condition.
With each passing day, it seems to Marilyn as if Tiffany is getting worse. And it isn't long before she begins to struggle with simple physical tasks.
The stairs, going up the stairs. She'd pull herself. She'd pull on the banister. She had difficulty. Also, I noticed that Tiffany was like a board. If she bent like this. She didn't arch.
Even taking a trip in their SUV eventually becomes a challenge.
Of course, they're a little bit off the ground, while the other kids would jump up on the step and get in. But Tiffany could not get in.
Growing more concerned by the minute, Marilyn's next stop is a pediatric orthopedist.
They did an x-ray in the office, and he saw the spine. There seemed to be a little narrowing, a little difference in the distance between the vertebrae. He just said, this is what seems to be the problem, why she doesn't bend, and that it's probably a congenital abnormality, something that happened at birth, and there was just no solution or nothing to do next. It was just what it was. And I can remember feeling a great sense of relief and even crying. Okay, she's, this is okay. She's okay now.
Despite her diagnosis, Tiffany continues to challenge herself. And when she asks to join the swim team, Marilyn couldn't be happier.
Tiffany never was good. She was always the last one, and she always brought up the rear. But she didn't seem like that bothered her.
While Tiffany struggles to keep up with her teammates in the pool, she enjoys the camaraderie and finds solace in the fact that she excels in the classroom.
There's the whole stereotype of, the nerd who's got the glasses and is the avid reader and just isn't good at sports. So I didn't think that there was anything wrong because I was good at school.
But when another seemingly unrelated yet frightening symptom begins to emerge, Tiffany and her parents can't help but sit up and take notice.
Tiffany ate differently than other children. She had difficulty swallowing. She would get choked occasionally.
She had problems with chewing and with swallowing. She'd gag. It took her a long time to eat.
Once again, Marilyn takes Tiffany back in to see a new round of doctors, but each and every one of them assures her that there's nothing wrong with her little girl.
We're worried that there's something there that we can't get pinpointed, that we don't know what to do with her next, that we've been to this doctor and that doctor and you don't know where to go next.
But little does the family know, a single terrifying incident is about to change everything.
We got in the pool. The kids were all splashing around, and Tiffany jumped in the pool. Tiffany was having great difficulty keeping herself above the water, and she just did not have enough strength in her legs to propel herself. And she started going under.
He's never been this sick before, so it did alarm me a lot.
I was just looking for someone to give me an answer or give me something to knock this thing out.
In the ER, the on-call doctor immediately sends Kevin for a round of tests.
They did an EKG, they did some blood work on him, they also performed a stool sample on him.
But the tests reveal nothing out of the ordinary, and the doctor's best guess is that Kevin has the flu.
And my reaction to that was just, okay, it could possibly be the flu, nothing more than that. and I thought it would disappear within a couple days.
Tina and Kevin head home, and sure enough, his symptoms soon clear up.
By the end of that week, things were getting back to normal.
I walked in the door on Sunday, and he was perfectly fine. He was really just absolutely back to himself.
And in fact, that Sunday we had gone for a walk with our dogs on a wooded trail.
But just as Kevin's starting to feel like he's in the clear, a frightening new symptom emerges.
I woke up and started to walk. I started to feel a little woozy, almost as if like I were drunk. And I was hoping within a couple hours I would start to feel normal and back to myself again.
Kevin decides to head into work, but once he's there, the dizziness only intensifies.
It was like my balance, my equilibrium was out a little bit, and then it started to get worse through the day. It was like I had to concentrate harder to be able to walk straight. And within a few hours, I called my wife and told her that things weren't feeling right.
I immediately told Kevin to come home.
Alarmed, Tina rushes home to meet him. But nothing could have prepared her for the state Kevin is in.
Kevin was missing steps. He was actually stepping down before the steps were there. He said, yes, I know, I noticed that I've been doing it all day. It is kind of scary for me. I don't know what's going on. He was just really off balance. He couldn't open the door by himself. I was afraid that if he did that, maybe he would fall over.
Yeah, it was very unsettling not being able to control myself. Just to walk across the room was definitely very frightening.
I couldn't hold him up any longer on my own. And when we had gotten into the emergency room, we had gotten a wheelchair for him to sit in.
At the ER, Kevin is examined by the on-call doctor, who notes that he has a low fever. And putting Kevin's seemingly unrelated symptoms together, she comes up with a new theory.
The doctors had a suspicion that it was Lyme disease.
Lyme disease is a bacterial infection caused by a bite from an infected tick. Classic symptoms include weakness of the limbs, fever, and gastrointestinal distress. The diagnosis makes sense to Tina.
We had found ticks on our dogs that same night, and possibly maybe he had gotten bitten by a tick. At that point, I was very relieved that they would, perform some tests, that something would show up to tell us what was going on.
But the findings are negative for Lyme disease. And though doctors perform test after test, they find nothing wrong. All they can suggest is that Tina call a neurologist.
The doctors have said they couldn't keep him because, nothing was showing up in the test.
They were going to discharge me, and we knew things weren't right at the time, and we couldn't understand why they were going to let us go.
I said, don't send him home. You can't send him home like this. I'm afraid something's going to happen in his sleep.
Reluctantly, Tina and Kevin return home. But the next morning, before Tina even has a chance to call the neurologist, an alarming new symptom emerges.
I had noticed that Kevin was starting to struggle to speak a little bit. His voice was sounding distorted.
I don't feel okay. I was really trying to concentrate to speak without slurring my words, and I just couldn't control it.
His voice had sounded like somebody was holding his tongue when he was starting to talk. It would sound like, I don't feel right. I was very, very scared at that point. I didn't know what to do. I was in shock.
Terrified by what she's hearing, Tina rushes Kevin back to the ER yet again.
At first, I thought it sounded like he had a stroke. If somebody had a stroke, like having to struggle to speak a little bit, like if he had that kind of slur, that's what it sounded like.
As soon as the ER doctor hears Kevin's halting speech, he doesn't think Kevin has had a stroke, but is suffering from some kind of neurological imbalance. If he's right, the problem should show up in a coordination test.
The doctors had gotten him up to try and get him to walk, maybe like a straight line to see if he could do it, and he just fell into the wall. They also gave Kevin a coordination test to where they had him pointing to the doctor's fingers or pointing himself to his nose, trying to point out stuff while it was moving, and he couldn't keep up with it. You can tell, like, he was so scared, and I've never seen my husband like that ever.
Alarmed, the on-call doctor admits Kevin to the hospital so they can run more tests. But within just hours, Kevin loses control of another basic function.
Usually Kevin has 20/20 vision, and they'd asked him to read just the clearest line that he could read, and he couldn't read anything, not one letter.
All Tina can do is look on in horror as her husband seems to be deteriorating right before her eyes.
What else could possibly happen to him next?
To make matters worse, none of the tests they've performed shed any light on Kevin's bizarre symptoms.
They were prodding him nonstop, drawing on his blood, MRIs, CAT scans again, EKGs. They had him on heart monitors and stuff like that, and still, nothing was coming back abnormal. It was just extremely frustrating to not know what was going on at that point.
The doctors are completely baffled. Kevin is obviously sick, but the tests show nothing wrong. Unfortunately, it isn't long before he takes yet another shocking turn for the worse.
Kevin couldn't close his eyes at all. They were completely open. He couldn't move them to side. They were just fixed.
From that point on, I don't remember anything.
He was really emotional that night and kept telling me that he was really, really scared and that he thought he was going to die. Throughout the night and into the next morning is when he had stopped talking on his own anymore.
Within a span of 24 hours, Kevin has lost the ability to talk, walk, or move his eyes. But incredibly, his tests indicate no problem of any kind. With no answer in sight and Kevin in rapid decline, the team calls in neurologist Andro Zangaladze.
I immediately understood that his condition was serious. I was looking for different causes of his condition. We excluded that he had a stroke by negative MRIs. We also ruled out tumor in the brain because MRI was normal.
I had hoped that he would perform a miracle, for God's sakes, you know what I mean? I was hoping that he could find something, finally, where no one else could.
Over the next 3 days, Dr. Zangaladze runs test after test. But as he desperately searches for an answer, Kevin continues to go downhill fast.
Within 4 days of being in the hospital, Kevin couldn't do anything on his own anymore.
He was absolutely 100% worse than he was 2 days before. And not having, at that point, any specific results, we still were considering a lot of different causes.
Finally, 5 days after being admitted to the hospital, Kevin lapses into unconsciousness.
At that point, I thought he was going to die because he had gotten so bad to the point where I didn't think he would return back to his normal self.
I jumped in and held on to her and pulled her out of the water. It was frightening. That was a very frightening moment. I was afraid that something was crippling my daughter.
Petrified by the near-death experience, the Houses immediately set up a series of appointments with specialists, hoping that one of them will be able to identify what's causing Tiffany's body to shut down. But once again, they come up empty.
And that was a very frustrating point in time. We as parents knew there was something wrong with our daughter.
But just when things seemed darkest for the Houses, Randall's cousin Roy, a pediatrician at the famed Mayo Clinic, pays them a visit. Desperate for some answers, they ask him to examine Tiffany.
He told me to do 3 little things. He said to get on the floor and get up off the floor, to run down a hallway, and to go up and down a flight of stairs.
After observing Tiffany attempt these simple tasks, Roy offers up an observation that shocks Marilyn and Randall to the core. He believes she's suffering from a type of myopathy, a degenerative muscle disease.
You know, you think of people you've seen with muscle diseases, and you think, is this what's going to happen to Tiffany?
Shaken by the possibilities, Marilyn immediately takes Tiffany to Minnesota's Mayo Clinic to meet with pediatric neurologist Dr. Mark Patterson.
She had a history of always having some difficulty keeping up with other children, difficulty with frequent falls, but her parents were concerned that her strength had been deteriorating for about 18 months before I saw her.
After giving Tiffany a rudimentary exam, Dr. Patterson is sure that something is indeed wrong. He promptly orders an electromyogram, or EMG, to determine if the problem is originating in Tiffany's nerves or her muscles.
The first part is to stimulate the nerves electrically and to take a very fine needle and to insert that into the muscle. And by looking at the pattern of electrical activation on the screen of the instrument, it's possible to determine if the problem arises in the nerve or is a primary problem in the muscle.
He stayed with Tiffany and talked to her during the whole thing.
It's an agonizing procedure that Tiffany bravely endures. And when it's over, Dr. Patterson is confident that he's uncovered a significant piece of the puzzle.
The EMG showed changes suggestive of a muscle disease. The next step was to perform a muscle biopsy to obtain a piece of muscle that could be examined under the microscope and also studied with special biochemical tests.
I remember that it was very painful. I remember waking up and it hurt.
Tiffany and Marilyn anxiously wait for the test results. But when the findings come in later that day, Dr. Patterson is blown away by what he sees.
The muscle biopsy showed that the muscle fibers were filled with glycogen.
Glycogen is the storage form of glucose, the body's major energy supply. And if glycogen is not converted into glucose when the body needs it, muscle function is greatly diminished.
In Tiffany's case, there's a deficiency of one of the enzymes which normally breaks down this storage form of glycogen to release glucose for the body's metabolism.
The excess glycogen in the muscle biopsy is the final clue Dr. Patterson needs to make his diagnosis.
Dr. Patterson called us into the office and he said that she has a very rare disease.
The storage of glycogen confirmed the diagnosis of acid maltase deficiency, also known as Pompe's disease.
Pompe disease is a neuromuscular genetic disorder caused by a mutation in the gene that makes an enzyme called alpha-glucosidase, or GAA. In healthy patients, the body uses GAA to break down glycogen, a form of sugar used for energy. But in patients like Tiffany, mutations in the gene reduce this essential enzyme. As a result, excessive amounts of glycogen accumulate in the body, causing muscle cells to literally attack themselves.
This storage of the glycogen damages the normal function of the cell so that parts of the cell begin to digest themselves, causing loss of muscle bulk and tissue over time. Ultimately, Pompe disease explained all of Tiffany's problems in early life. Because she couldn't expand her lungs normally, she wasn't able to cough normally to clear her lungs, and so in that situation, anyone is susceptible to infection. Because she wasn't able to generate energy in a normal fashion, and it means that you can't maintain your normal posture, you don't walk in a normal fashion, she couldn't move normally.
In fact, the disease affects almost every muscle in the body, including the esophagus.
There are so-called voluntary muscles involved in swallowing. It becomes difficult to swallow.
But while it's reassuring to finally know what's been causing Tiffany's body to go haywire, the diagnosis is devastating. There is no cure for Pompe disease.
Dr. Patterson said that it is a progressive degenerative muscle disease. And I said, what can we do? And he said, nothing. There is no treatment, there is no cure, you can do nothing. And that she would live to her second decade.
Since Kevin Hughes entered the hospital less than a week ago, he's undergone a terrifying and mysterious decline. Now he's in a near comatose state, and it's all his wife Tina can do to keep it together.
It was scared out of my mind. I just kept thinking, you know, is he gonna die from this, for God's sakes? You know what I mean? What could be going on in his body that's doing this to him?
I was so scared that they weren't going to find out what it was, and that when they did find out, it was going to be too late.
Dr. Zangaladze goes back to square one, reviewing every detail of the case. And at the top of Kevin's file, he finds something that stops him in his tracks.
We had one very important preceding illness. 2 weeks prior to his disease, he had a diarrhea.
Dr. Zangaladze now suspects there may be a link between Kevin's diarrhea and the neurological symptoms that have left him unconscious. To confirm his hunch, he orders more blood tests. Tina waits helplessly by Kevin's side and prays that the doctor finds the answer.
It was extremely hard to sit there and watch, you know, your husband really, really sick and you couldn't help him.
Then, 10 days after Kevin was first admitted, there's a knock on his hospital room door.
Dr. Z had come in early in the morning to tell us that something had come back positive on one of the blood tests.
Dr. Zangaladze has found the presence of antibodies in Kevin's blood. Antibodies which fight the bacteria associated with Kevin's diarrhea. It's the clue he's been searching for.
I diagnosed Kevin with Bickerstaff brainstem encephalitis.
Bickerstaff brainstem encephalitis is a rare autoimmune disorder in which antibodies target the brainstem. In a healthy individual, antibodies fight bacteria. Once their job is done, they flow through the bloodstream harmlessly. But in patients like Kevin, his antibodies mistakenly identify his brainstem as toxic and attack it, causing it to swell up.
Kevin's body produced antibody to defeat the bacteria. Unfortunately, the same antibody attacked his brain because of the similarity of the bacteria and certain compounds of the brain structure.
When I got that news, I just burst into tears. You know what I mean? I called every person imaginable at that time in the morning to tell them, finally, something showed up.
Although he can't know for sure, Dr. Zangaladze suspects the bacteria first entered Kevin's system 3 weeks earlier at the barbecue.
It comes from the food, undercooked meat or poultry. Anybody could get the bacteria who eats the contaminated food.
They had said Kevin's immune system could have been a whole lot lower than everybody else's because he had done the MS-150 bike ride. So they thought that maybe he was, you know, kind of exhausted and weakened from that.
All the other terrifying symptoms Kevin experienced were the direct result of his brainstem swelling.
When the brainstem is disturbed, one cannot function properly.
The first thing to be affected was Kevin's coordination. As the antibodies continued to assault his brainstem, Kevin's speech became impaired. Then, his vision began to deteriorate.
Brainstem controls our eye movement, and if your eyes are not moving together well, then your image does not get into focus, and people perceive this as a blurry vision or double vision.
Eventually, the inflammation of his brainstem even impacted his ability to stay conscious.
When you hear something like Bickerstaff encephalitis, it's very confusing, you know, and scary at the same time. What happens now? I mean, is it something that's going to stay in his body for the rest of his life?
Since we knew that his disorder was due to existing antibodies in bloodstream attacking his brain, the common sense was to remove somehow this antibody from the system.
The standard agent for removing antibodies is a blood product called IVIG, which can reduce inflammation. But because Bickerstaff brainstem encephalitis is so rare, Dr. Zangaladze can't say for sure if the treatment will work.
There's no studies to address the most effective treatment during this disorder.
They did explain to me that it could possibly not work, but this was definitely an option to try and that, you know, it could make him better.
Over the next 5 days, while Kevin undergoes the IVIG treatment, Tina rarely leaves his side.
I was looking for anything, any changes nonstop. Constantly, you know, asking him questions, trying to see if he would blink his eyes.
But 48 hours later, Kevin still hasn't moved a muscle.
I'm sitting in this room in the dark thinking the worst possible things.
On the night of the second day, at 3 in the morning, Tina is napping at Kevin's bedside when a noise wakes her up.
While we were sleeping, everything was dark in the room when he had just blurted out a couple words out of nowhere. And it had startled me. I said, "Did you say something?" And he even looked at me and he said, "Where are my dogs? Who has my dogs?" I said, "I can't believe you're asking me this right now. This is what you wake up and say." But like, thank God you actually are saying something.
I don't actually remember saying where my dogs are. I do remember feeling like I just woke up and saying something to my wife, and I could tell she was ecstatic.
Kevin responded very well to the treatment. Within 2 days, he could say more words. His speech should become more understandable and slowly starting to move his eyes into all directions.
Tina is thrilled at Kevin's rapid progress, but she can't help but wonder why it took so long to get a diagnosis.
This disease is rare. I cannot give you exact number, but only a few hundred cases have been reported.
Fortunately, the damage done by the disease is temporary, but Kevin faces a long path back to full recovery.
I definitely had to relearn how to walk and how to talk and speak phonetically.
Can you spell world for me?
World, W-O-R-L-D.
Can you spell it backwards?
L-D. D-L-R-O-W.
Good.
That was definitely the point that I realized what had happened to me to its full extent.
Despite Kevin's grueling rehabilitation, he and his family feel lucky that Dr. Zangaladze made the diagnosis before Kevin suffered any damage to his heart or lungs.
If we wouldn't make the diagnosis promptly, he could have died.
It's just so scary to think, like, you know, what if we didn't do anything? What if we would just let it run its course and he didn't go to the doctors and get treated soon enough? What could have happened to him?
He said, well, you know, I can't tell you that she will live a week or a month, a year. It would just depend on, you know, what the circumstances.
It tends to particularly involve the muscles of respiration, so that progressive weakness of those muscles leads to respiratory failure and, without treatment, to death.
He described the disease to me, that there was no cure for the disease, that it was progressive, and he told me that she wouldn't see her 20th birthday.
There was never a lot of emphasis placed on being told what my diagnosis was. It was just, this is something we have to deal with and find a way to overcome.
The family is completely shattered by the diagnosis. At the same time, they can't help but wonder why it took more than 9 years to uncover it.
This is not a common disease. It's about 1 in 40,000 or so. When you see a child with this sort of weakness, there are often other things that are more common that people would think of. When Tiffany simply seemed to be a little clumsy, had frequent infections, those things are common in young children, and so one wouldn't necessarily consider the possibility of a muscle disease.
Not sure where to turn next, the family heads back to Texas, determined to figure out a way to move on with their lives. But 2 weeks later, Tiffany's condition takes a harrowing nosedive.
She was developing all sorts of rapid problems. You could notice some significant changes in her breathing. She lost the ability to walk.
Sometimes I would have to carry her, and I couldn't, you know, I couldn't do that in all situations. So I had bought a wheelchair, and I had to make her use it. Eventually, after a few fights and stuff, she would use it. And then, of course, she couldn't do without it.
Tiffany's scared to death. We're scared to death. Just having the cold facts presented to you like that, you realize that, you know, life's pretty darn short.
Tiffany's fate looks grim, but the Houses refuse to accept a death sentence for their daughter. With their own money, they fund the first medical conference for Pompe disease right in San Antonio.
We brought in 15 or so of the key researchers around the world. That really got things rolling.
Not long afterwards, Tiffany participates in a medical trial with a cutting-edge enzyme replacement therapy designed to allow her body to break down glycogen once again. The results are nothing short of astounding.
It changed my life. I mean, it was a huge change.
She's a lot stronger. It's made a difference in what she can do. She can now, you know, she can bend from the waist, maybe pick up something. You know, there's just everyday things that she wasn't able to do.
The treatment, which she'll be on for the rest of her life, has slowed down Tiffany's muscle degeneration and allowed her to regain her independence. Today, she's still confined to her wheelchair, but the 25-year-old has defied all of her doctor's expectations.
I'm the president of our patient organization. I'm a board member of the International Pompe Association, so that's keeping me pretty busy. I like to spend a lot of time with my niece when I can. She's growing up so fast, and it's really fun to watch.
Currently in her second year of law school, Tiffany continues to beat the odds. When she graduates, she hopes to work as an advocate for the disabled.
She'll make a darn good lawyer. She's already contributed a lot to society, and I know she'll continue that.
I always thought there was something special about Tiffany, and I don't know if that was because she was mine or what, but you know, when we first adopted her, I thought, this kid is pretty special.
It was always, okay, yes, this is what you have, but it was never made to be, this is all that you are. I've learned a lot about perseverance.
Today, a full year since the ill-fated barbecue, Kevin has fully recovered and is enjoying his life again.
Now everything's back to normal. I'm playing with the dogs, taking them for long walks, and back out on the bike, training for my MS 150 ride again.
While the odds of Kevin ever coming down with the disease again are very low, Tina and Kevin can't help but pay extra special attention when preparing their food, especially meat.
It's pretty scary to think that something like that could happen to you just from not properly cooking something.
I'm very cautious from now on about everything that we possibly, digest. I either boil it, or they also told me that if you freeze stuff before you eat it, it'll kind of kill the bacteria.
For Tina and Kevin, each day has taken on new meaning, because now they know how quickly it can all slip away.
There's definitely not a day that goes by that I don't have some thought about what happened. I feel blessed. It's an experience I would wish no one ever had to go through.
You don't know how precious life is, and it can be taken away from you so quickly. Almost losing Kevin really makes you think about what you have, and it makes us cherish each other even more.